So we've got time for about 10 minutes of questions. You might have higher ultimates in your mind for some of the countries that Jeffries showed, but this idea that two exponential functions, when you pull them together, have a power, a surprising power to change what we think is normal, is true. And this model is available. There's a vigorous discussion of it on the oil drum. Feel free to weigh in on that. Email Jeffrey. This is a question from Ewan Means, who made a presentation on Gawar yesterday. Jeffrey, what evidence is there that Russian and UAE production are about to start to decline?
The production profiles are based on the logistic method. As we mentioned, the post 1984 Russian production is consistent with the logistic model, and their production year over year, our crude oil production since October has basically been flat. And as I mentioned, there have been a number of recent reports in the Russian media warning about problems with Russian production. And I'm certainly not an expert on Russia, but my understanding is the bulk of the production that the recent rebound has come from just producing fields that were left fallow after the collapse of the Soviet Union. In regard to United Arab Emirates, we've really never taken a hard look at it. ACE on the oil drum recently just did a detailed analysis, and his opinion was that UAE had probably peaked in 2006. But the production profile was on UAE, it was based on the logistic model. That's simply what the model indicated.
Here's an intriguing question. So we have these old oil fields and we have these young populations in many of these exporting countries. Consumption increases in these countries, in some of them, because gasoline and other refined products are highly subsidized, for instance, Iran and Venezuela. As exports decline, the oil goose is no longer laying gold eggs, but lead eggs. How will governments that depend on the gold react when this occurs?
For me?
Yeah, sure, either one of
The
you.
question is what happens when as cash flow declines?
Yeah, from exports.
I think there's I'm stipulated that we're probably going to see two phases in the export declines. Phase one, I think, occurs, you're going to see rising, there's going to be a positive feedback loop, which you're seeing today, I think. As oil prices go up, their cash flow from export sales will increase even as volumes decline. And so what the exporting countries are seeing is a price signal, where times are great, their cash flows are going up even as export volumes decline. So I think in phase two, their cash flow will decline even as prices go up because their volumes have fallen to such a low level. There's a historical analog here, it's kind of interesting. Reportedly, it's maybe urban legend, but reportedly, the largest Rolls-Royce dealership in the world was in Midland, Texas in the late 70s. Even as Texas peaked in 72 and started declining, but cash flow went through the roof. So spending, the Texas oil men thought, it was, good times are going to last forever. And I think that's exactly what you're seeing in all these exporting countries. Foreign car sales in Russia are up at 50% per year. Average price of an apartment is like $330,000 for a two-bedroom apartment, and they're building $1,000 a night hotel rooms in Moscow. So it's just, by the way, Rembrandt and the oil drum in Europe estimated that demand in Saudi Arabia the first half of this year was up to 9% per year. And I have seen some reports that they're going to have to shift 500,000 barrels of liquids production to consumption in Saudi Arabia because of the natural gas shortfall, which is the reason they're looking at importing coal. I think that among the headlines for this year should have been Saudi Arabia contemplates importing coal.
Joe, here's a question for you. It's the $20 trillion question. Will this money that's needed for investment, expanding energy supplies, or even keeping them where they are, or slowing the depletion rates of them, will this money actually be there? Will it be spent or not?
Well, as I tried to mention in the conclusion, I didn't do it very effectively. part of our fundamental conclusion is we're going to flip over to demand driving all the decision making. And so, you know, it sounds strange coming out of the mouth of somebody on the supply side of the industry, but we really feel like what's going to start happening is dramatic changes in fuel efficiency in all phases in countries that can afford to do it. Now, the wild card in all that is if, you know, inflation just runs up so high, or that a recession, you know, turns into a recession, then you can collapse a lot of that demand growth potential in the developing countries. But the fundamental fact, we believe, is the developing countries, they have to grow like that because there's so much visibility to the standard of living as they look around the world, and they see the potential for themselves to grow, but they have to sort of kind of ignore all the trends that are telling them not to grow that fast and just keep going. And the only people who can react maybe a little more rationally are the people that can afford to. That's us. So that's, we think, is the fundamental effect of, you know, where is the $20 trillion going to come from, or the gap? It's not going to be met. And there's going to be a demand side reaction because commodity prices, particularly on the oil side, you know, to $120 may look cheap.
A question on for Jeffrey. Do you think, in your view, are we at peak exports now, or can we expect an increase in the next few years?
I think 2005 was peak exports, and I think it's going to, in aggregate, the export decline is going to accelerate from here. I think the top 5 are to the export situation as the top 4 or 5 oil fields are to global production. It's, you know, peak oil is really the story of the big fields. We don't stop finding oil. We just can't offset the declines of the big fields. Now, down in the bottom half, you've got several exporters showing increasing production exports, Angola, and of course, Canada's bringing on the tar sands production. Offsetting that, you've got case histories like Mexico that has a high percentage consumption, like 50% or so. So it's going to look a lot like the UK, Indonesia, and export land model. And Venezuela appears to be going nowhere fast. Production's drifting down, and their consumption for the past 5 years has gone up at 9% per year. So there are a lot of offsetting things, and also the smaller exporters, it's like the smaller fields, and come on faster, but it's going to decline faster. So it's, the reason we focused on these top 5 is we think they drive the picture, and it is a fairly concise 5 examples to look at. But our forecast from here on out is that it just gets incrementally worse. I think we're just going to see, of course, it's subject to all kinds of extraneous events. The bird flu and all kinds of other things could happen, but without any extraneous events, I think we're looking at just an accelerating decline rate in world net oil export capacity.
So you could do stand-up tragedy if you were invited places.
Well, that's why I asked Steve Andrews' permission to leave with some kind of positive spin at the end. Alan's got some very interesting case histories. Switzerland's cut off from oil in the Second World War and responded by accelerating their electrification system. Average American today uses as much oil as 400 Swiss used in the Second World War. But as Americans, we just can't imagine life without a car. But I think pretty soon we're not going to have a choice.
Let's take a 20-minute break, but as you leave the room, here's the final question that I'll just pose to you. Do these findings about America's demand versus available exports mean that the troops are never coming home? So we'll be back here at 3:30. Thanks.